Do you think honesty pays, or does it just get you fired? Sarah Bennett was a nobody. She was the invisible hand filling water glasses at Chicago's most exclusive restaurant, living paycheck to paycheck, terrified of eviction. But one rainy Tuesday, she heard a whisper she wasn't meant to hear, a betrayal that would cost a good man his life. She had two choices: stay silent and keep her job, or slip a warning to a millionaire and risk everything. She chose the risk. The next morning, a sleek, black Rolls-Royce pulled up to her crumbling apartment block. Her neighbors thought the police had come for her. But the truth? The truth was worth millions. This is the story of the waitress, the billionaire, and the napkin that changed history. The rain in Chicago doesn't wash the city clean, it just makes the grime slicker. That's how Sarah Bennett felt as she tied her apron tight around her waist, slick with exhaustion, worn down by the relentless grind of survival. At 28, Sarah looked older. Worry lines were beginning to etch themselves around her eyes, not from age, but from the weight of the $40,000 medical debt her late mother had left behind. Every shift at the Obsidian Room was a battle. It was the kind of restaurant where a steak cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, and the clientele didn't look at you. They looked through you. "Table 4 needs water, Bennett. Move it," the floor manager, Henri, snapped. Henri was a short man with a Napoleon complex and a cheap cologne that smelled like desperate ambition. "And don't look them in the eye. We have VIPs tonight." Sarah nodded, keeping her head down. "Yes, Henri." She grabbed the crystal pitcher, the condensation cooling her clammy palms. Being invisible was her superpower. It was how she survived. If you were invisible, Henri couldn't yell at you. If you were invisible, the wealthy patrons wouldn't complain about your hair being slightly frizzy from the humidity. Table 4 was the prime spot, a semi-private booth upholstered in crushed red velvet, tucked into a dim alcove near the wine cellar. Tonight it was occupied by two men who radiated power, but of very different frequencies. Facing the room was Arthur Sterling. Everyone in Chicago knew Arthur. He was a tech giant, the founder of Sterling Dynamics, a man who had made billions developing clean energy grids. He was in his late 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a weary slump to his shoulders that suggested the weight of his empire was becoming too heavy to bear. He didn't look like a shark. He looked like a tired grandfather. Across from him sat the shark. Julian Hayes was younger, perhaps 40. He was handsome in a manicured, predatory way. His suit was Italian silk, sharp enough to cut skin. He smiled too much, but the smile never reached his eyes. They were cold, calculating, scanning the room like a radar system. Sarah approached the table, her steps silent on the plush carpet. "Arthur, you're overthinking it," Julian was saying, his voice a smooth baritone. "The board is ready to oust you. They think you're losing your edge. If you don't sign the transfer of assets to my holding company by midnight, they'll strip you of everything. I'm doing this to protect your legacy, old friend." Arthur sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know, Julian. I know. It's just handing over 40 years of work. Sterling Dynamics is my life." "And I will keep it safe," Julian promised, leaning in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We sign the papers tonight. You announce your retirement tomorrow. You go to that island in Greece you've always talked about. Let me handle the wolves." Sarah poured the water into Arthur's glass. He glanced up, offering a small, tired smile. "Thank you, miss." Sarah froze for a microsecond. Nobody thanked the help here. "You're welcome, sir," she whispered. Julian didn't look at her. He waved a hand dismissively. "We're fine. Leave us." Sarah retreated, shrinking back into the shadows near the service station. Something about Julian made the hair on her arm stand up. It wasn't just the arrogance, it was the urgency. He was pushing too hard. But it wasn't her business. Her business was keeping this job so she wouldn't be homeless by Friday. She busied herself folding napkins, trying to tune them out. But the restaurant was quiet tonight, the rain drumming against the windows creating a vacuum of sound. Then Arthur stood up. "I need to use the restroom, Julian. When I get back, I'll sign." "Good man," Julian beamed, raising his wine glass. "To the future." Arthur shuffled away toward the back of the restaurant. Sarah watched him go, feeling a strange pang of pity. He looked like a sheep walking willingly toward a cliff. What happened next changed Sarah's life forever. As soon as Arthur turned the corner, Julian's demeanor shifted instantly. The warm, supportive friend vanished. His face went slack with boredom, then tightened with malice. He pulled his smartphone from his inner pocket and dialed a number. He didn't lift the phone to his ear. He spoke into his Apple AirPods, assuming the ambient noise of the restaurant would mask his voice. He didn't know Sarah was standing just behind the decorative pillar 5 feet away, refilling the pepper grinders. "He's in," Julian said, his voice low but razor-sharp. "He's signing in 10 minutes. Sarah paused, her hand hovering over a grinder. She shouldn't listen. She should move. But her feet felt rooted to the floor. "No," Julian hissed, annoyed. "The transfer is irrevocable. Once he signs, the assets move to the Cayman Shell Company immediately. By the time the SEC figures out the fraud, I'll be in a non-extradition country, and Sterling Dynamics will be gutted." Sarah's breath hitched. Fraud. Gutted. Julian took a sip of his wine, swirling the red liquid. "And don't worry about Arthur realizing it. I switched his heart medication in his travel bag. The stress of the bankruptcy next week will trigger a massive cardiac event. The autopsy will show natural causes. He won't live long enough to testify." Sarah dropped the pepper grinder. It hit the carpet with a dull thud, but in the silence, it sounded like a gunshot. Julian spun around in the booth, his eyes locking onto her. Sarah panicked. She immediately dropped to her knees, pretending to fumble for the grinder, keeping her head down, praying he hadn't seen her face clearly. "Boy," Julian snapped, snapping his fingers at a passing busboy. "Get me another drink. This one is stale." He hadn't realized she had heard. Or maybe he just thought she was too stupid to understand what Cayman Shell Company or cardiac event meant. To men like Julian, waitresses weren't people. They were furniture. Sarah grabbed the grinder and scurried back to the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She burst through the swinging doors, nearly colliding with Henry. "Watch it, Bennett," Henry barked. Sarah ignored him, leaning against the stainless steel counter, gasping for air. He's going to kill him, not with a gun, but with a pen and a pill. It was murder. Cold, calculated murder. She looked through the small circular window in the kitchen door. Arthur was walking back to the table. He looked so fragile. He sat down, and Julian smiled that shark smile, sliding a thick leather folder across the table. A gold fountain pen glinted in the candlelight. "Sign here, here and here," she saw Julian mouth. Sarah looked around the kitchen. The chefs were shouting orders. Henry was yelling at a hostess. Nobody cared. If she went to the police, what proof did she have? The word of a broke waitress against a multi-millionaire? They'd laugh her out of the precinct. By the time they investigated, Arthur would be dead. She had to do something now. "Order up! Table 4! Filet mignon! Rare!" the chef screamed. It was their main course. Sarah stepped forward. "I'll take it." "You're not a server, Bennett. You're support staff," Henry yelled. "The server is in the bathroom. Sarah lied quickly. "Food's getting cold." Before Henry could stop her, she grabbed the heavy tray. Her hands were shaking. She had seconds to formulate a plan. She couldn't speak to Arthur. Julian was right there. If she said, "He's stealing your company," Julian would deny it and have her fired on the spot. She needed to be subtle. She needed to get a message to Arthur that Julian couldn't see. She looked at the tray. The steak. The wine. The check folder wasn't there yet. The receipt. Technically, she couldn't give the check before the meal, but she had a pen in her apron. She balanced the tray on one hand, and with the other she frantically grabbed a stiff cocktail napkin from the service station. With trembling fingers, she wrote 4 words. "Do not sign. Poison." It was crazy. It sounded like a prank, but it was all she had. Sarah approached table 4. The atmosphere was heavy. Arthur was holding the gold pen, the tip hovering over the signature line of the document. "Just right there, Arthur," Julian urged softly. "Then you're free." "Here is your dinner, gentlemen," Sarah said, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. She placed the steaming steak in front of Julian. Then she moved to Arthur. As she set the plate down, she made a calculated error. She accidentally knocked his water glass. "Oh, I am so clumsy. I am so sorry," Sarah gasped. She hadn't knocked it over completely, just enough to spill a little water onto the table, dangerously close to the documents. "You idiot!" Julian roared, snatching the papers away. "Watch what you're doing." I'm sorry." Sarah grabbed a handful of napkins to dab the spill. In that chaotic flurry of white linen, she pressed the cocktail napkin she had written on directly into Arthur's hand, which was resting on the table. She squeezed his hand hard, a violation of every protocol in fine dining. Arthur flinched, looking up at her, startled. Sarah locked eyes with him. For 1 second, she dropped the mask of the invisible servant. She looked at him with desperate, terrifying intensity. She moved her eyes from his to Julian and back to the napkin in his hand. "Read it," she begged silently. "Get out of here," Julian shouted, standing up. "Henry, get this incompetent girl away from us." Henry was already rushing over, his face purple with rage. "Bennett, you are done. Get to the back." "I'm sorry, sir," Sarah whispered to Arthur, pulling her hand away. Arthur was stunned. He looked at the wet spot on the table. Then he felt the stiff paper in his palm. He didn't open it immediately. He saw the terror in the waitress's eyes as she was dragged away by the manager. "Arthur, ignore her," Julian said, smoothing his suit jacket, composing himself instantly. Hard to find good help these days. Now, where were we? The signature. Arthur looked at Julian. He looked at the pen. Then, slowly, under the table, he unfolded the damp cocktail napkin. "Do not sign. Poison." Arthur Sterling didn't build a billion-dollar empire by being a fool. He had been feeling off lately. Tired. Foggy. Julian had been the one to recommend the new cardiologist. Julian had been the one handling his schedule. Arthur looked at the steak in front of him. Then he looked at his best friend. "You know, Julian," Arthur said, his voice surprisingly steady, "I think I've lost my appetite." "What?" Julian's smile faltered. "Arthur, the board meeting is in the morning. We need this done tonight." "I don't think I'll be signing tonight," Arthur said, closing the leather folder. The air in the booth grew frigid. Julian's eyes went dead. "Arthur, don't be stupid. You are signing that paper." "No," Arthur said. He wasn't the tired grandfather anymore. The titan of industry was waking up. "I think I'll have my lawyers review this one more time. Independent lawyers, not yours." Julian stared at him. He knew. Somehow, the old man knew. Julian's gaze darted to the kitchen door where the waitress had disappeared. Back in the kitchen, Sarah was already stripping off her apron. "You're fired, Bennett," Henry was screaming. "Get your things and get out. Don't expect a reference. You'll never work in this town again." Sarah didn't argue. She grabbed her purse and her coat. She ran out the back door into the alleyway, the heavy steel door slamming shut behind her. She was alone in the rain. She had no job, no money for rent, and she had just made an enemy of a man who could probably have her killed. She pulled her thin coat tighter and began the long walk to the train station, sobbing into the collar. She had done the right thing. So why did it feel like her life was over? She didn't see the dark SUV with tinted windows that slowly pulled out of the parking lot, trailing her as she walked down the wet street. The rain hadn't let up. If anything, it had turned harder, stinging Sarah's face like icy needles. She kept her head down, clutching her purse tight against her chest. Every set of headlights that swept past her made her heart seize. She thought about the black SUV she had seen leaving the restaurant parking lot. Was it Julian? Was it a hitman? Or was she just a paranoid, fired waitress losing her mind? She ducked into the subway station, the smell of stale urine and ozone hitting her instantly. It was safer here, surrounded by people, even if those people were tired commuters and drunks. She swiped her transit card. Insufficient funds. "Come on," she whispered, tears mingling with the rain on her cheeks. She dug through her purse, finding a crumpled $5 bill she kept for emergencies. She bought a single-ride ticket, her hand shaking so badly she dropped the change. On the train, she sat near the conductor's booth. Across from her, a man in a grey hoodie was staring at her. Sarah held her breath. He had cold eyes, unblinking. She gripped her keys between her knuckles, a trick her mother had taught her before the cancer took her strength away. Aim for the eyes, Sarah. Always the eyes. The train screeched to a halt at her stop, a run-down neighborhood on the south side where the streetlights flickered and the sirens were a constant lullaby. The man in the hoodie didn't get off. Sarah exhaled, a ragged sound, and sprinted up the stairs to the street level. She ran the 3 blocks to her apartment building. The Arms, a glorious name for a brick box with peeling paint and a front door that didn't lock. As she fumbled with her keys at the entrance, a shadow fell over her. "Late night, Bennett." Sarah jumped, dropping her keys. It was Mr. Kowalski, the landlord. He was leaning against the radiator in the hallway, a lit cigarette dangling from his lip despite the no-smoking sign above his head. "Mr. Kowalski," Sarah gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "You scared me." "Rent was due yesterday," he grunted, ash falling onto his stained tank top. "I don't see an envelope under my door." I have it," Sarah lied. "I just need to cash my check tomorrow. Please, just one more day." Kowalski stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of stale beer and malice. "You said that last month. I got a waiting list of people who want this rat hole. You got 24 hours. If the money isn't in my hand by noon tomorrow, I'm changing the locks, and I'm keeping your stuff to cover the debt." "No," Sarah cried. "My mother's things are in there. You can't." "Watch me." He flicked his cigarette butt onto the floor and crushed it with his heel. Noon. He lumbered away down the hall. Sarah scrambled to pick up her keys, unlocked her door, and slammed it shut, engaging all 3 deadbolts. She slid down the door until she hit the floor, burying her face in her knees. The adrenaline of the restaurant was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of reality. She had saved a billionaire, maybe. But she had lost her livelihood. She crawled to her mattress, she didn't have a bed frame, and curled up under the thin quilt. The apartment was freezing. Kowalski controlled the heat, and he was stingy with it. She pulled her phone out. 11:45 p.m. If Julian was right, if Arthur had signed, the transfer was happening now. If Arthur had listened to her, Julian was probably furious. Sarah checked her bank account app. $12.43. She had $40,000 in medical debt. Rent was $900. She was drowning. "I did the right thing," she whispered to the empty room. "Mom, tell me I did the right thing." The silence of the room was her only answer. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear, and she fell into a fitful sleep, dreaming of sharks in Italian suits and glasses of water that turned into poison. The morning sun hit the cracked window pane with a cruel brightness. Sarah woke up with a headache that throbbed behind her eyes. For a split second, she forgot. Then, the memory of Henri screaming, "You're fired!" crashed down on her. She checked the time. 10:30 a.m. She had 90 minutes before Kowalski threw her out. Sarah dragged herself up. She needed coffee, but she was out. She drank tap water from a chipped mug and looked around the tiny apartment. What could she sell? The TV was old. Her clothes were thrift store finds. The only thing of value was her mother's locket, and the thought of pawning it made her feel physically ill. Suddenly, a commotion erupted outside on the street. It started as a low murmur, then grew into shouting. "No way!" she heard Mrs. Higgins, the neighborhood gossip, yell from the stoop below. "In this neighborhood, they must be lost." "Is it the feds?" someone else shouted. "Maybe a drug bust?" Curiosity piqued, Sarah walked to the window and peered through the grime. Her breath caught in her throat. Parked directly in front of the Arms, taking up 2 parking spots and blocking a fire hydrant, was a car that cost more than the entire building. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, a sleek beast of midnight blue and chrome, shining so brightly it looked like a spaceship that had landed in a landfill. The windows were tinted jet black. A crowd was gathering. Kids were taking photos with their phones. Mr. Kowalski was standing on the sidewalk, looking nervous, probably wondering if the city inspectors had finally come in style to shut him down. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was a mountain of a man, easily 6'4", wearing a pristine black suit, a chauffeur's cap, and white gloves. He looked like he could snap a baseball bat in half, but his demeanor was calm, professional. He walked around the car, ignoring the gawking neighbors, and consulted a tablet in his hand. He looked up at the building numbers, then adjusted his tie. He walked straight toward the front door of the Arms. Sarah backed away from the window. "It's Julian," she thought, panic rising like bile. He sent his goons to finish the job. They found me. She looked for a weapon, a kitchen knife. She grabbed the dull, serrated blade she used for cutting bread. Her hands were sweating. She heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. Thud, thud, thud. They stopped on her floor. There was a pause. The hallway went silent. Even the neighbors seemed to be holding their breath. Knock, knock, knock. 3 precise, authoritative raps on her door. Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the room, the knife trembling in her hand. "Go away!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "I'm calling the police." "Miss Bennett?" A deep, gravelly voice came through the wood. It wasn't angry, it was polite. "My name is Silas. I represent Mr. Arthur Sterling. He would like a word." Sarah lowered the knife slightly. "Arthur Sterling?" I don't believe you," she stammered. "How do I know you're not with Julian?" There was a brief silence. Then a white envelope was slid under the door. Sarah approached it cautiously, keeping one eye on the handle. She picked it up. It was heavy, made of thick, expensive cream paper. It was sealed with a wax stamp, the stamp of Sterling Dynamics. She tore it open. Inside was a single index card. On it, written in shaky handwriting that she recognized from the night before, the handwriting of an old man, was a message. "You left before I could thank you. The water spill was clumsy. The message was life-saving. Please come with Silas. You are safe. Arthur. Sarah dropped the knife. She unlocked the first deadbolt, then the second, then the third. She opened the door a crack. Silas was standing there. Up close, he was even more intimidating, but his eyes were kind. He took off his cap. "Miss Bennet," he said, bowing his head slightly. "Mr. Sterling apologizes for the intrusion. He insisted on sending the car. He said you probably wouldn't want to take the bus today." Sarah looked past him. Mrs. Higgins and Mr. Kowalski were peeking around the corner of the hallway, their jaws on the floor. "Is she being arrested?" Mrs. Higgins whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "No, ma'am," Silas said, turning his head slowly to glare at the nosy neighbors. "She is a VIP guest of Mr. Sterling." He turned back to Sarah. "Shall we?" Sarah looked down at her jeans and worn-out t-shirt. I look like a mess." "You look like someone who had a very long night," Silas said gently. "The car is waiting." Sarah grabbed her purse and stepped out into the hallway. She locked her door. As she walked past Mr. Kowalski, she stopped. The landlord looked terrified. A man in a Rolls-Royce coming for his tenant changed the power dynamic considerably. "Mr. Kowalski," Sarah said, her voice gaining a sudden steadiness. "About the rent." "Don't worry about it," Kowalski squeaked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Pay when you can. Take your time." Sarah didn't smile. She just nodded and followed Silas down the stairs. Walking out of the building felt like stepping onto a movie set. The crowd parted. Silas opened the back door of the Rolls-Royce. The interior was cream leather and smelled of expensive mahogany and fresh rain. Sarah slid inside. As the heavy door thudded shut, sealing out the noise of the south side, she realized she had crossed a threshold. She just didn't know where it led. The drive was silent and smooth. The car's suspension absorbed every pothole in Chicago. Sarah sat stiffly in the back, her hands folded in her lap. There was a chilled bottle of sparkling water in the armrest console and a bowl of fresh strawberries, but she didn't touch anything. She felt like an imposter. They didn't drive to the police station. They didn't drive to a courthouse. Silas navigated the car toward the Loop, the financial heart of the city, and pulled up to the curb of the Sterling Tower, a 70-story glass needle that pierced the grey sky. "We are here, Miss Bennet," Silas said, opening her door. He escorted her past the security guards, who nodded respectfully at him, and led her to a private elevator. There were no buttons inside, just a biometric scanner. Silas pressed his thumb to the pad, and the car shot upward. "Where is Julian?" Sarah asked, her voice small in the enclosed space. Silas looked straight ahead. "Mr. Hayes is currently unavailable. He is with the authorities." Sarah exhaled, her shoulders sagging. He was caught. The elevator doors opened directly into a penthouse office that spanned the entire top floor. It was a space of glass and steel, with a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. In the center of the room, sitting behind a desk the size of a small car, was Arthur Sterling. He looked different than he had in the restaurant. The slump was gone. He was wearing a fresh suit, charcoal gray, and while he still looked tired, his eyes were sharp. "Sarah," Arthur said, standing up. He walked around the desk, leaning on a cane, but moving with purpose. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, feeling incredibly underdressed. I'm glad you're okay." Arthur stopped in front of her. He studied her face for a moment, then did something unexpected. He reached out and took both her hands in his. "You saved my life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And you saved my life's work." I heard him on the phone," Sarah said. "He was talking about pills and Cayman Islands." Arthur nodded grimly. He gestured to a seating area. "Please, sit," They sat on leather couches. Silas stood by the door, a silent sentinel. "After you left," Arthur began, "I didn't eat the steak. I told Julian I was feeling ill and needed to go home immediately. He was furious, tried to force the pen into my hand. But I kept the napkin you gave me in my pocket. It was my anchor." Arthur picked up a remote and clicked a button. A screen on the wall flickered to life. It showed a paused video frame. It was security footage from the restaurant. "I have security detail everywhere, Sarah. Julian knew that. But he was arrogant. He thought they were just muscle. He didn't know they record audio." Arthur pressed play. The audio was fuzzy, but clear enough. Sarah heard Julian's voice from the night before, speaking into his AirPods while Arthur was in the bathroom. "The stress of the bankruptcy next week will trigger a massive cardiac event." Arthur turned the screen off. "We gave the footage to the district attorney at 2:00 a.m. this morning. They obtained a warrant for Julian's apartment. They found the remaining supply of the drug he swapped my heart medication for. It was digitoxin. In high doses, it mimics a heart attack. It's untraceable if you aren't looking for it." Sarah shivered. "So he's in jail?" "He's being arraigned as we speak," Arthur said. "Attempted murder, corporate espionage, fraud. But that's not the only thing." Arthur leaned forward. "This morning, my forensic accountants went through the books. Julian hadn't just planned to steal the company. He had been siphoning funds for 5 years. He was going to bankrupt Sterling Dynamics to cover his tracks and leave thousands of my employees jobless. He was going to destroy everything I built." Arthur looked out the window at the city below. "I was blind. I trusted him. He was like a son to me. Without you, Sarah, I would be dead, and my legacy would be ashes." Sarah looked at her hands. "I just didn't want you to get hurt. I know what it's like to be used, to be invisible." Arthur looked back at her. "You are not invisible, Sarah. Not anymore." He reached for a folder on the coffee table. It wasn't the leather one from the restaurant. It was a blue legal folder. "I did a little digging into you, Sarah. I hope you don't mind. I know about your mother. I know about the medical debt. I know you were fired last night for misconduct." Sarah blushed. "I'll find another job. I'm a hard worker." "I know you are," Arthur smiled. "But you won't be working at the Obsidian Room." He slid the folder toward her. "What is this?" Sarah asked. "Open it." Sarah opened the folder. It was a contract. Employment agreement. Role: executive liaison and internal auditor. Company: Sterling Dynamics. Sarah's eyes scanned the page. "I don't understand. I'm a waitress. I don't know anything about energy grids." "I have plenty of engineers," Arthur said firmly. "I have plenty of MBAs. What I don't have, what I realized last night I am desperately missing, is someone with integrity. Someone who observes. Someone who isn't afraid to speak truth to power, even when it costs them everything." He pointed to the salary line. Sarah gasped. The number was followed by 5 zeros. It was more money in a year than she would make in 10 years of waiting tables. Plus, Arthur added casually, a signing bonus. He pulled a check from his pocket and laid it on top of the contract. Pay to the order of Sarah Bennett. Amount $50,000. "That should cover the debts," Arthur said softly, "and perhaps get you out of that apartment building. Silas tells me the landlord is unpleasant." Sarah stared at the check. The tears came then. She couldn't stop them. The stress, the fear, the grief for her mother, the relief. It all broke the dam. "Why?" she sobbed. "Why would you do this?" Arthur stood up and walked over to her. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Because, Sarah," he said gently, "loyalty is rare, but bravery is priceless. You saved my life for nothing but the sake of what was right. That makes you the most valuable person in this building." Sarah wiped her eyes. She looked at the contract. Then she looked at Arthur. "I don't have any nice clothes for an office," she said, a watery smile breaking through. Arthur laughed, a genuine, hearty sound. "Then we'll go shopping, after lunch. Silas?" "The car is ready, sir," Silas said from the door. "But first," Arthur said, his eyes twinkling with a bit of mischief, "there is one loose end we need to tie up. I believe the manager who fired you, Henri, is still working at the restaurant." Sarah stiffened. "Yes." "I think," Arthur said, buttoning his jacket, "it's time we went back for lunch. I'd like to order the filet mignon, and I think he needs to see exactly who he fired." The lunch rush at the Obsidian Room was not merely a meal service, it was a contact sport. If dinner was a symphony, lunch was a knife fight in a phone booth. This was the hour when the titans of Chicago's Loop descended from their glass towers to close deals, threaten rivals, and consume 3 martini lunches that cost more than a mid-size sedan. Henri, the floor manager, stood at his podium like a captain on the bridge of a sinking ship, barking orders into the humid air of the restaurant. He was in a fouler mood than usual, which was saying something. The previous night's disaster, the sudden departure of Arthur Sterling, the spilled water, the screaming, had left him on edge. He had spent the morning on the phone with the staffing agency, berating them for sending him incompetent gutter trash like Sarah Bennett. "Miguel!" Henri snapped, his voice cutting through the clatter of silverware. "Table 9 is empty. Why is it empty? Empty tables don't make money. Turn it. Now!" Miguel, a young bus boy who was working 2 jobs to put himself through community college, scrambled to clear the white linen. "Yes, Henry." "Sorry, Henri." "And tuck in your shirt," Henri hissed, stepping closer to the boy, his cheap cologne clouding the air. "You look like a slob. One more mistake, and you're out on the street with Bennett. Do you hear me?" "Yes, sir," Miguel whispered, keeping his eyes on the floor. Henri smoothed his tie, checking his reflection in the glass of the wine cellar. He felt besieged. He needed today to be perfect. Rumor had it that a food critic from the Tribune was prowling around the city this week. Everything had to be flawless. "Reservation for 3, Mr. Conway," the hostess, a terrified girl named Jessica, murmured as she led a group of suits past the podium. "Good, good," Henry muttered, checking his watch. 12:45 p.m. Peak chaos. Then the atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't a sound, it was the absence of sound. It started near the front windows, huge floor-to-ceiling panes of glass that looked out onto the rainy street. The diners near the window stopped chewing. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Conversations about mergers and acquisitions died in throats. Henry looked up, annoyed by the sudden drop in volume. "What is it now?" He looked out the window and froze. Directly in front of the restaurant's entrance, in a strict, no parking zone that usually resulted in an immediate tow, a vehicle had pulled up. It wasn't a taxi. It wasn't an Uber Black. It was the Rolls-Royce Phantom, the same midnight blue Leviathan that had whisked Arthur Sterling away the night before. It sat there like a monolith, gleaming under the grey sky, radiating an aura of untouchable wealth. Traffic behind the car was stopped. Horns were honking. But the Rolls didn't move. Is that Mr. Sterling?" Jessica whispered, clutching a stack of menus. Henri felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. He came back. After the disaster last night, the billionaire had returned. This was it. This was Henri's chance to apologize, to grovel, to assure Mr. Sterling that the clumsy waitress had been dealt with and that the Obsidian Room was still the premier dining establishment in Chicago. "Clear the VIP booth," Henry barked at Jessica, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his cuffs. "Now, move the tourists to table 4. I don't care if they're eating. Move them!" He rushed to the heavy oak double doors, composing his face into a mask of obsequious delight. He needed to look professional. He needed to look like he was in control. The doors swung open. A hush fell over the entire dining room. It was the kind of silence usually reserved for church or courtrooms. Arthur Sterling entered first. He looked revitalized. The weary slump that had defined him the night before was gone. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that probably cost more than Henri made in a year. He walked with a cane, yes, but he used it less for support and more as an accessory of power. His eyes scanned the room, sharp and predatory. But it was the person walking next to him that confused Henri. It was a woman. Henri's brain struggled to categorize her. She wasn't a wife. Arthur was a widower. She wasn't a secretary. She walked beside him, not behind him. She was stunning. She wore a navy blue blazer, tailored to perfection, with the sleeves pushed up slightly to reveal a thin gold watch. Her trousers were cream-colored silk, flowing over a pair of dangerous-looking stilettos that clicked rhythmically against the marble floor. Her hair, which Henri had only ever seen pulled back in a frizzy, frantic bun, was now a cascade of soft, glossy waves, framing a face that wore a terrifyingly calm expression. She carried a leather portfolio under one arm and walked with a stride that suggested she owned the ground beneath her feet. Henri blinked. There was something familiar about the set of her jaw, something about her eyes. They approached the podium. The entire restaurant was watching. Miguel, holding a tray of dirty dishes, stood frozen near the kitchen door, his mouth slightly open. "Mr. Sterling!" Henri exclaimed, bowing low, his voice pitching up an octave. What an incredible honor. We didn't expect you back so soon. Please allow me to escort you to your booth. I have a bottle of the 82 Chateau Margaux breathing for you right now." Arthur didn't move. He didn't smile. He simply stood there, resting his hands on the head of his cane, looking at Henri with a mixture of pity and distaste. "We aren't here for the wine, Henri," Arthur said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the room. Henri's smile faltered. "Oh? Of course, sir. A light lunch, then?" "The sea bases. I'm not here to eat," Arthur interrupted, his tone clipping Henri's words like shears. He turned slightly, gesturing to the woman standing beside him. "I am here to introduce you to my new associate." Henri turned his attention to the woman. Up close, the familiarity was itching at his brain, but he couldn't place it. She looked like money. She looked like authority, and Henri, in his arrogance, had never bothered to memorize the faces of the help. To him, waitresses were interchangeable, faceless drones. "A pleasure, madame," Henri said, offering a greasy smile. "Welcome to the Obsidian Room." The woman stared at him. Her expression didn't change. She didn't blink. She just let the silence stretch out, long and uncomfortable, until Henri began to fidget. "Hello, Henri," she said. The voice hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't the voice of a wealthy socialite. It was a voice he had heard 1,000 times. It was the voice he had screamed at yesterday. The voice he had told to shut up and pour. Henri squinted. He looked past the expensive makeup, past the blowout, past the designer clothes. He looked into her eyes. Bennett, he stammered. The name came out as a squeak. "Sarah," she corrected him, her voice cool and steady. "Ms. Bennett, if we're being formal." Henri took a step back, bumping into the podium. The reservation book slid off and hit the floor with a loud thwack, but no one moved to pick it up. I don't understand," Henry whispered, his face draining of color until it matched the tablecloths. You were fired. I fired you. Yes, Sarah said, stepping closer. The click of her heels sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. You did. You told me I was incompetent. You told me I would never work in this town again. You told me to get out. She glanced around the room, taking in the shocked faces of the regulars, the wide eyes of Jessica the hostess, the stunned grin breaking out on Miguel's face. I took your advice, Henri, Sarah continued. I got out. And I got a promotion. Henry looked desperately at Arthur. Mr. Sterling, surely this is a joke. This girl, she's a liability. She spilled water on your table. She disrupted your dinner. She's the reason I'm alive, Arthur boomed. The volume of his voice made Henry jump. While you were busy worrying about table turnover and your own ego, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, this woman was noticing that my best friend was poisoning my drink. While you were dragging her away, she was slipping me a note that saved my life and my company. A collective gasp rippled through the dining room. Several diners put their phones down. This was better than any business deal. This was a public execution. She possesses more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire body, Arthur continued, and that is why I hired her. Hired her? Henry laughed nervously, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. As what? A personal assistant? Arthur smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. No. Sarah is my new executive liaison and internal auditor. Henry frowned. Auditor? What does she have to audit here? This is a restaurant, not a power plant. Arthur turned to look at the room. He looked at the crystal chandeliers, the velvet booths, the mahogany bar. It's a beautiful building, isn't it, Sarah? It has good bones, Sarah said, her eyes critical as she scanned the ceiling. But the management is rotting from the inside out. Arthur nodded. I agree. That's why I bought it. Henry felt his knees give way. He grabbed the podium for support. Excuse me? I bought the building, Henry, Arthur said casually, as if discussing the weather. I called the ownership group this morning, offered them 20% over market value. They were signing the deed while I was having my coffee. Arthur turned back to Henry, his eyes hard. Which means, effective immediately, Sterling Dynamics owns this property. I am your landlord. And Ms. Bennett here? Arthur gestured to Sarah. She represents the landlord, Arthur finished. She is in charge of the transition. She handles the leases. She handles the contracts. And she handles the staff evaluations. The silence that followed was absolute. Henry looked at Sarah. Really looked at her. For years he had held her livelihood in his hands. He had threatened her with poverty, docked her tips, made her clean the grease traps when she complained. He had enjoyed the power. Now, the power had reversed so completely it gave him vertigo. Sarah walked around the podium. She didn't look at Henri. She looked at the reservation book on the floor. She bent down, gracefully, in her new suit, and picked it up. She dusted it off and placed it back on the stand. Then she turned to Henri. He was shaking. Tears of panic were welling in his eyes. He had a mortgage. He had alimony payments. He was 50 years old with no other skills. Miss Bennett, Henry whispered, his voice trembling. Sarah, please. I was just doing my job. The stress. You know how it is. We can work this out. I can fix the schedule. I can give you the best sections. Just tell Mr. Sterling. Stop, Sarah said. She didn't shout. She just held up a hand. She opened her leather portfolio. Inside was a crisp notepad and a pen, the same kind of expensive pen Arthur had used. "I'm not here to take your sections, Henry," she said calmly, "and I'm not here to hear your excuses." She walked past him, into the center of the dining room. She looked at the service station where the servers were huddled. She looked at the kitchen door where the cooks were peering out. "Miguel," Sarah called out. The busboy jumped. Yes, Miss Bennett. Come here, please." Miguel walked forward, wiping his hands on his apron. He looked terrified and thrilled at the same time. Sarah looked at Henry. "How long has Miguel been working here?" "A year," Henry mumbled. "And he's still a busboy?" Sarah asked. "Even though he knows the menu better than half the waiters? Even though he speaks 3 languages and helps the tourists when you can't understand them?" Henry didn't answer. "Miguel," Sarah said, turning to the young man, "you're promoted, junior server, effective immediately. Your pay doubles." Miguel's eyes went wide. "Miss Bennett, thank you so much." "And Jessica," Sarah said, turning to the hostess, "no more double shifts without overtime pay. I checked the logs last night. Henry has been doctoring the hours to save on the budget bonus. That ends today. You get paid for every minute you work." Jessica put a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. "Thank you." The dining room burst into low murmurs. The diners were witnessing a revolution. Finally, Sarah turned back to Henry. He looked small, defeated. He was waiting for the axe to fall. He was waiting for her to say the words he had said to her. "Get out." Sarah looked at him. She remembered the humiliation. She remembered the fear of not being able to pay rent. She could crush him. It would be easy. It would feel good. But then she looked at Arthur. He was watching her proudly, waiting to see what kind of leader she would be. Julian Hayes was a man who destroyed people to feel big. Sarah Bennett was not Julian Hayes. "Henry," Sarah said softly. He flinched. "Yes?" "I could fire you," she said. "I could have security throw you out the back door into the alley, just like you did to me. And honestly, you deserve it." Henry hung his head. "But I'm not going to do that," Sarah said. Henry's head snapped up. You're not?" "No," Sarah said. She stepped closer, her voice steel. "Because unlike you, I know that people need jobs. I know you have children, and I'm not going to punish them for your cruelty." She pulled a document from her portfolio and slapped it onto the podium. "You are on probation, Henri," Sarah declared. 3 months. During that time, your salary is frozen. You will undergo management training, specifically a course on workplace empathy and labor laws. She leaned in, her face inches from his. "And you will bus tables," she whispered. Henry's eyes bulged. "I beg your pardon." "You heard me," Sarah said, her voice hard. "For 2 weeks you are not the manager. You are support staff. You will refill water glasses. You will clear plates. You will clean spills. And you will learn exactly what it feels like to be invisible." She straightened up and buttoned her blazer. "If you can do that with a smile, and without a single complaint, you can keep your job as manager. If you slip up once, if you treat one person with disrespect, you are done. Do we have a deal?" Henry looked at Miguel, who was now his superior. He looked at the customers watching him. He looked at Sarah, the woman he had tried to break. He swallowed his pride. It tasted like ash. "Yes, Miss Bennett," Henry whispered. "We have a deal." "Good," Sarah said. She pointed to table 4. "That table needs water. Move it." Henry didn't argue. He grabbed a water pitcher, his hands shaking, and hurried to the table. "Thank you, Henry," Sarah called after him. She turned back to Arthur. The billionaire was beaming. "Remind me never to cross you." Arthur chuckled softly. That was far more painful than firing him. "He needs to learn," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "He needs to see people." "He sees you now," Arthur said. "They all do." Arthur gestured to the door. "Shall we? I believe we have a board meeting to crash, and I need you to explain to the shareholders why their stock is about to go through the roof." "I don't know anything about stocks, Arthur," Sarah admitted as they walked toward the exit. "You know about people, Sarah," Arthur said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Stocks are just numbers. Business is about people. You'll do fine." As they walked past the bar, the bartender began to clap. Then Miguel joined in. Then Jessica. Slowly, the diners joined in too. It wasn't a thunderous ovation, but a ripple of applause that followed them out the door. Sarah Bennett walked out of the obsidian room and into the bright Chicago afternoon. The rain had stopped. The sun was reflecting off the wet pavement, turning the grey city into gold. Silas held the door of the Rolls-Royce open. "Good afternoon, Miss Bennett," Silas said with a genuine smile. "Hi, Silas," Sarah said. She paused before getting in. She looked back at the restaurant. She looked at the help wanted sign in the window. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cool air of freedom. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't a victim of circumstance. She was Sarah Bennett. She had stared down a shark, saved a life, and reclaimed her dignity. She slid into the leather seat of the Rolls-Royce. The door closed with a solid, reassuring thud, sealing out the noise of the city. "Where to, Miss Bennett?" Silas asked from the front. Sarah looked at Arthur, then out the window at the skyline that was waiting for her. "Forward, Silas," she said, a smile finally touching her lips. "Just drive forward." Sarah's story reminds us that true power isn't about money, suits, or titles. It's about character. In a world that often rewards the loud and the ruthless, it was a quiet act of integrity that toppled a giant. Sarah could have stayed silent. She could have kept her head down and protected her meager paycheck, but she chose the hard right over the easy wrong. We often think we are too small to make a difference. We think we are just a waitress, just a student, or just an employee. But the truth is, you never know who is watching. You never know when a single moment of honesty will change the trajectory of your entire life. Arthur Sterling gained a fortune, but he would tell you that the most valuable thing he found that night wasn't a contract. It was a friend who couldn't be bought. What would you have done if you were in Sarah's shoes? Would you have risked your job to pass that note? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story inspired you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about karma, justice, and the twists of real life, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Remember, the truth always comes out in the end. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.